The billionaire's voice cut through the ballroom like a dare. "Open this vault in 60 seconds, and the 200 million inside is yours." The crowd laughed. Of course they did. No one expected the challenge to be real, until a girl in a worn maid's uniform stepped forward. Lila, the maid's daughter, eyes steady, hands trembling. She shouldn't have spoken. She shouldn't have even been seen. But when she whispered, "I'll try," the laughter died. The timer began. Seconds turned into heartbeats. And as the billionaire's smirk faded, one truth began to surface. What she was about to unlock wasn't just his vault, but his past. Before we dive in, drop a like, subscribe if you love stories that hit the heart, and tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from right now? The chandeliers hummed above her like frozen stars. Every glint of crystal, every polished surface in the Vane estate seemed to whisper the same thing. This world was not made for her. Lila moved carefully, balancing a silver tray as footsteps echoed through the marble floors. The scent of jasmine and power filled the air. From the shadows of that vast hallway, she could see reflections of people who would never see her at all. Her mother, Rosa, had worked in this house for 20 years. Age had curved her spine, but not her pride. "Keep your eyes down, Lila," she'd whispered that morning. "The higher the ceiling, the colder the hearts." Yet as Lila polished the glass railings, her gaze drifted upward, to the skyline visible through walls of crystal. Beyond that glass was a world she wanted to touch, even if she wasn't supposed to. By noon, the estate was alive with preparations. The billionaire's mother, Alexander Vane, was hosting a charity gala, an annual spectacle of silk dresses, champagne laughter, and carefully disguised envy. Lila followed the rhythm of the other staff, moving between rooms like a ghost rehearsed in invisibility. But today, something was different. A new safe had been installed in the study. Sleek, unmarked, titanium gray. Even from across the room, it radiated authority. She paused longer than she should have. "Don't stare," Rosa murmured, tugging at her sleeve. "That safe is worth more than our lives." Lila smiled faintly. "Then it must hold something priceless." Rosa sighed, too tired to argue. That evening, when the gala began, the house transformed into a cathedral of vanity. Strings played beneath golden light, and diamonds winked like tiny gods. Alexander Vane entered late, as always, the kind of man who didn't walk into a room but claimed it. He was young, sharply tailored, his confidence bordering on cruelty. The guests greeted him with the reverence people reserve for wealth. Lila watched him from behind the buffet table, invisible once more, but her eyes lingered. He had the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. When an investor asked about the rumors of his new company, Alexander replied smoothly, "I don't chase dreams, I buy them." The crowd laughed. He looked past them, almost bored. Then his gaze met Lila's for half a second. Long enough for her to lower her head, the silver tray trembling in her hands. Later, as she refilled glasses, she overheard the guests whispering about the safe. "He keeps his trust fund in there," said one. "No, his father's will," another insisted. Alexander heard them and smirked. "It holds the cost of trust," he said, lifting his drink. "And that's not something money can buy." His tone was light, but his eyes hardened at the last word. Lila wondered what kind of man needed a vault to guard trust. When she passed by the study door again, she noticed Alexander standing alone inside, staring at the safe as if it were a mirror. His reflection looked smaller there, swallowed by shadows. Lila hesitated in the doorway. He caught her. "Lose your way, Maid." His voice carried a smirk. "Or do you think it'll open if you stare hard enough?" "I was just cleaning, sir." He stepped closer, the air between them taut with unspoken hierarchy. "People like you should be careful with curiosity," he said softly. "It can look a lot like ambition." She wanted to apologize, but something in his tone, the emptiness behind the arrogance, stopped her. Instead, she said, "And people like you should be careful with walls. Sometimes they lock more than they protect." For a heartbeat, his expression faltered. Then he turned away, laughing under his breath. "You've got quite the tongue for a maid's daughter." Her face burned, but she didn't look down this time. When she walked away, she could still feel his gaze following her, sharp and confused. As midnight neared, the music softened. Lila found Rosa resting by the service door, her hands trembling from exhaustion. "You shouldn't speak to him that way," Rosa murmured, worry clouding her eyes. "Men like him never forget being challenged." Lila knelt beside her mother, brushing the wrinkles from her apron. "Maybe he should," she whispered. "Maybe someone needs to remind him he's human." Upstairs, Alexander stood by the open balcony, the city stretching beneath him like a chessboard. He replayed her words in his mind, annoyed at how they lingered. He'd built empires from logic, but that girl's defiance unsettled something he couldn't name. He looked back at the safe, at everything he thought defined control. And for the first time, it didn't feel like enough. Down below, the lights dimmed as the last guests departed. The marble floors gleamed again, perfect and empty. Lila walked past the study one final time, the soft hum of the security lock still faintly audible in the dark. She paused, tracing its rhythm in her mind, counting seconds, listening to how metal responded to silence. Something in her chest stirred. Not greed, not rebellion, but curiosity laced with destiny. She didn't know it yet, but the next time she stood before that vault, the world above those marble floors would never look the same. The night glittered with wealth and wine. Every laugh, every clink of glass echoed like music composed for the powerful. Beneath the chandelier's gold glow, Alexander Vane stood at the center of it all, untouchable, immaculate, amused. He thrived in these moments where admiration felt like oxygen and arrogance passed for charm. Lila moved among the guests quietly, refilling glasses, collecting empty plates. Her presence meant to be unnoticed. But she noticed everything, especially him. He was surrounded by men who wanted to be him and women who wanted to be seen by him. Yet his attention drifted off into the corner where his titanium vault gleamed behind a pane of reinforced glass. Even from a distance, it carried the weight of legend, a physical reminder that some things in his world could only be opened by brilliance. "Tell them the story again," one guest said, laughing into her flute of champagne. "How no one's ever cracked it," Alexander smirked, tapping his glass. "That vault," he said, "has a code only I know. It took engineers a month to build and me one afternoon to perfect." The guests applauded lightly. Someone called out, "How much is inside?" He shrugged. "A number that changes lives." His mother sighed from across the room, but Alexander only smiled wider. "Tell you what," he added, "let's make the evening interesting." The chatter hushed. "Anyone who can open that safe in under a minute keeps what's inside." Gasps rippled through the room, followed by laughter. Phones lifted to record. It was absurd, a billionaire turning his own fortune into a party game. Yet his grin dared anyone to say otherwise. A tech CEO stepped forward first, his confidence loud. 60 seconds? Watch me. He typed furiously, muttering to himself until the timer beeped and the vault stayed shut. Another tried. Then another. Engineers, coders, heirs. Each walked away red-faced, earning only Alexander's lazy smirk. "Genius," he said at last, "isn't taught. It's inherited." Lila froze where she stood, polishing a glass. The words stung more than she expected. Inherited. As if brilliance, like money, belonged to bloodlines. She glanced at her mother across the room. Rosa was carrying a tray of wine when her foot slipped on a patch of spilled champagne. The tray tipped, and crimson poured across the marble like a wound spreading under light. A sharp silence fell. "Rosa!" The head butler's voice sliced the air. Clumsy old fool. "Do you realize what you've—" "That's enough," Lila said, stepping forward before she could stop herself. Dozens of eyes turned to her. The tray she'd been holding trembled slightly, but her voice didn't. "It was an accident." Alexander tilted his head, curious. "And who are you to interrupt?" "Her daughter," she said quietly. "And she doesn't deserve to be humiliated for one mistake." The room buzzed. A maid's daughter daring to speak. To him, Alexander's lips curled. You think you understand worth, then? Tell me, do you? Lila met his gaze. Maybe worth isn't what you keep locked up. For a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, before amusement drowned it. How poetic, he murmured. Tell me, Maid's daughter, do you think you're smarter than them? He gestured toward the failed guests still lingering near the safe. She didn't answer. Silence stretched, heavy and electric. He turned to the crowd. Then let's find out. Open it! A ripple of laughter erupted. He's joking, someone whispered. But he wasn't. His smirk deepened as he reached for the remote that armed the timer. 1 minute. Open it and everything inside is yours. Rosa grabbed Lila's wrist. Don't, she whispered, trembling. Please, it's a trick. Lila's heart hammered against her ribs. Part of her wanted to retreat, to vanish back into the quiet safety of servitude. But another part, stronger and older than fear, rose up. The part that had spent years fixing broken locks and listening to the rhythm of gears. The part that couldn't stand the way his voice wrapped intelligence in cruelty. Her eyes shifted toward the safe, sleek, silent, waiting. She stepped forward. The laughter softened into murmurs. Alexander leaned back, crossing his arms. You've got 60 seconds, he said, his tone dripping with mockery. Show us what ambition looks like without pedigree. She stopped in front of the vault, her reflection gleaming on its metallic surface. The keypad blinked faintly, an indifferent machine in a room full of human noise. She studied it carefully. The small scratches near the edges, the faint fingerprint smudges from failed attempts. Her fingertips hovered just above the panel, feeling the faint hum of energy beneath the metal. Rosa's voice trembled behind her. Lila, don't do this. Alexander's friends laughed again, louder this time. She's stalling, one shouted. She doesn't even know where to start. But Lila's world had already gone quiet. She wasn't hearing them anymore, only the soft ticking of the countdown timer Alexander had just pressed. The numbers glowed red. 60 seconds. A bead of sweat traced down her temple as she exhaled slowly, her mind sharpening with each second. Alexander's smirk wavered for the first time, though he'd never admit it. Something about her stillness unsettled him, the way she wasn't flustered or desperate, only listening. Tick-tock, he murmured. She brushed her hand along the edge of the dial, noticing a subtle looseness near the fourth segment. Every sound, every vibration carried meaning. The room felt suspended between breaths. Someone whispered, "What is she doing?" "Losing," another said. But Alexander wasn't sure anymore. When the timer hit 30 seconds, she turned her head slightly toward him and spoke, her voice calm, almost curious. "You said this vault holds the cost of trust," she said. "Whose trust did you lose, Mr. Vane?" The question hit harder than any move she could have made. His jaw tightened. The room stirred with confusion, but Lila saw it, the brief crack in his composure. 15 seconds. 10. She pressed her fingers lightly against the pad again, as if tracing a pulse. Then she stopped. The timer beeped once, demanding an answer. And that's when she looked up, her eyes steady, her breath even. "I'll try," she said simply. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Alexander's smirk returned, but it no longer felt secure. "Then by all means," he said softly. "Begin." The timer reset. The first click echoed like thunder in the silence, and in that moment, between arrogance and intuition, the real challenge began. The timer began with a sharp electronic beep, cutting through the laughter like a blade. 60 seconds glowed in red across the vault's panel, pulsing like a heartbeat. Every pair of eyes in the room fixed on Lila. She stood still for a breath too long, motionless, small against the towering vault. Then she knelt, her knees pressing into the cold marble. The sound of her breathing filled the silence the way a violin's first note fills a theater. Alexander folded his arms, his smirk unwavering. "You've already wasted 5 seconds, he said softly. His voice was calm, confident, but behind it lingered the faintest tremor of curiosity. Lila didn't respond. Her hands hovered just above the keypad, fingers trembling not from fear but from restraint. She closed her eyes, tuning out the crowd, the whispers, the rhythm of mockery rippling through the hall. All she let in was the ticking timer and the faint vibration beneath the metal. 50 seconds. She pressed her ear closer to the door of the vault, listening. Somewhere deep inside, a mechanism shifted, a whisper of steel moving against steel. To anyone else, it was meaningless. But to her, it was language. She remembered the first lock she'd ever opened. Not a vault, just a broken cabinet in the servants' quarters. Rosa had been scolded for losing the key, and Lila, no older than 12, had spent the night listening to the tumblers click under her fingers until it opened. That night, she'd learned something no book could teach. Everything built by hands can be unbuilt by patience. 40 seconds. Someone chuckled from the crowd. She's just touching it. Is this part of the act? Alexander's smirk deepened. No, he said, eyes locked on her. This is what happens when curiosity forgets its place. The laughter that followed was polite and cruel, but it faded when Lila began to move. Her fingers traced the outline of the keypad, slow and deliberate, feeling for warmth, for signs of recent use. Near the lower corner, she found it, a faint heat residue from earlier attempts. Someone had pressed there more than once. She smiled faintly. The pattern wasn't random. 35 seconds. The timer ticked louder now, as though the machine itself wanted her to fail. She pressed a sequence, 1, 2, pause, 3, the soft electronic beeps layering like notes in a melody. For a moment she hesitated. The rhythm wasn't right. She backtracked, adjusting, her instincts guiding her more than logic. Alexander tilted his head. You really think you can guess what no one else could? She finally looked up, just for a second. Not guess, she said. Listen. It was a strange word to him. Listen. He'd built a world that only spoke, never heard. 25 seconds. Her fingertips moved again, now faster, with a musician's precision. The crowd leaned forward. No one was laughing anymore. Each sound, each small click, became a thread of tension stretching tighter and tighter across the room. The air seemed to thicken around her. The chandeliers above swayed slightly from the heat rising off the guests' breath. Even the guards near the walls had gone still. Lila's mind split time into fragments. Every heartbeat was a measurement. Every tick of the clock a wave to balance against the pulse of the lock. Her mother's face flashed before her eyes, tired, anxious, waiting by the door. Lila whispered under her breath, Don't be afraid, Mama. 15 seconds. Her hand slipped for a moment. A bead of sweat hit the keypad and shorted a light. Gasps rippled through the room. Alexander exhaled in satisfaction. Time's almost up, he said. Sometimes knowing when to quit is the smarter choice. But she wasn't listening anymore. Her focus had sharpened beyond nerves. She leaned close again, eyes narrowing. Inside the vault, something shifted, a faint clunk, like a metal heartbeat answering hers. It was close. So close. 10 seconds. Every instinct in her body told her to move now, to trust what she felt rather than what she saw. She tapped the final sequence, a pattern shaped not by code but by rhythm. 2. Pause. 4. 1. The timer flashed. 5 seconds. Her breath caught. 3. Alexander said. The crowd held its breath. 2. Lila pressed the final button. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The timer froze at 1 second, the room suspended in absolute silence. Then, a soft metallic click. The sound wasn't loud, but it was final, undeniable, devastating in its simplicity. The vault's red light turned green. For a full second, no one moved. Then gasps erupted, sharp and disbelieving. A woman dropped her glass. Someone whispered, Impossible! Alexander's smirk vanished like mist under sunlight. He took a slow step forward, eyes locked on the open latch. Lila rose to her feet, her palms still trembling. She didn't gloat, didn't smile. She simply stepped back, giving space for truth to reveal itself. The vault door released with a low hiss, heavy and deliberate, like the exhale of something ancient. Alexander's voice broke the silence. How did you do that? She turned to him, calm now, her voice steady. It wasn't locked by brilliance, she said softly. It was locked by habit. He blinked, as if trying to decide whether he'd heard her correctly. She continued. People leave patterns where they live, even the ones who think they're perfect. Her words hung in the air like smoke. Behind her, the vault's door began to swing open, revealing a dim interior. The crowd leaned forward as if drawn by gravity itself. Whatever they'd expected, cash, gold, something loud, the hush that followed said this was different. Lila took one step closer, the green light reflecting in her eyes, and just before the door reached its full arc, she looked over her shoulder at Alexander, the man who had mocked her, the man who believed intellect belonged to the rich, and she said quietly, "Sometimes all it takes to open a door is listening." The final hinge creaked. Light spilled across the floor, and the truth inside the vault waited to rewrite everything they thought they knew. The vault door opened with a slow, aching groan, the sound of metal surrendering to truth. The green light blinked once, then faded, leaving only the echo of what had just happened. Every breath in the room seemed to stall. The guests, frozen in disbelief, leaned closer, expecting the shimmer of wealth, the proof of Alexander's legend. But there was no gold, no stacks of cash, only emptiness and a single velvet box resting in the center, small enough to fit in a trembling hand. Beside it lay an old photograph, its corners curled with age. Lila stepped back, her shadow trembling on the polished floor. For a long moment, no one spoke. Even the hum of the chandelier felt muted. Then Rosa's voice broke the silence, a fragile sound that didn't belong in such a grand room. "Oh, dear God," she whispered. Her hands rose to her mouth, eyes widening as she saw the photograph more clearly. Alexander moved first, the swagger drained from his stride. The color in his face had vanished, replaced by something raw, something almost frightened. He reached into the vault and lifted the photo with shaking fingers. The paper trembled like it recognized him. It was a picture of a small boy standing beside a woman in a maid's uniform, both smiling beneath the same chandelier that now hung above them. The woman was younger then, her hair darker but her eyes unmistakable. Rosa. The air left the room like a gust of wind. Guests exchanged looks, the confusion shifting to discomfort. "Is that?" someone whispered. Alexander didn't answer. He stared at the image as if time itself had turned against him. Then, with visible effort, he opened the velvet box. Inside lay a folded letter and an antique pocket watch, its face cracked, the initials AV engraved along the edge. His father's watch. Rosa's knees gave way. Lila rushed forward, catching her before she hit the ground. "Mama?" she whispered, but Rosa's tears were already falling, her voice breaking between sobs. "He kept it. All these years he kept it." Alexander's throat tightened. "What is this?" His voice cracked through the silence, but it wasn't arrogance anymore. It was confusion laced with disbelief. "Why would this—" Rosa looked up at him, and the weight of decades pressed into that single glance. "Your father gave that to me before he died," she said, her tone trembling but clear. "He said to keep it safe. He said you'd understand, when you were ready." Her words hit him harder than any humiliation could. The guests looked away, pretending not to listen, but every one of them did. Alexander staggered back a step, clutching the watch as though it burned him. "No," he muttered, almost to himself. "No, it can't be." Lila felt her mother trembling in her arms. "Mama, what does it mean?" Rosa looked at her daughter, her face pale with the ghosts of memory. "He built this house from nothing," she whispered. "Your father, Mr. Vane's father, he wasn't always rich. When the company nearly collapsed, he borrowed every penny he had from the staff who stayed. Most left, but I didn't." Her eyes glistened with pain and pride. "He promised he'd never forget." Lila's gaze flickered to Alexander. His jaw clenched, but his hands were unsteady. "That's not true," he said, his voice low, hollow. "My father, he made this empire himself." He made it with her," Rosa said softly. "With loyalty. With faith." The words cut through the air, clean and irreversible. The laughter, the champagne, the arrogance, all of it evaporated. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some leaving quietly through the open doors, eager to escape the truth unraveling before them. The only sound left was the ticking of the watch in Alexander's palm, each second striking like judgment. He turned to Lila. "You didn't know what you were opening," he said. Almost accusing. "No," she answered, her tone steady. "But maybe it was time someone did." His eyes met hers, the defiance in her voice hitting something he'd buried long ago. Beneath his suit and success, he looked suddenly young, the boy from the photograph, lost in the shadow of the man he'd tried to become. Rosa wiped her face, her tears streaking lines of memory down her cheeks. "He told me that trust isn't written in contracts or safes. It's written in how we treat those who have nothing left to give." Alexander's composure broke. He closed his eyes, lowering the watch back into the vault like an offering. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "I thought locking it away would stop it from haunting me." Lila took a slow step closer. "But it wasn't haunting you, was it?" "You were haunting it." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, there was no superiority, only shame. The mask he'd worn for years shattered quietly across his face. He tried to speak, but no words came. The crowd had thinned now. Only a few remained, standing in uneasy silence, unsure whether they'd witnessed a scandal or a confession. The air felt heavier, warmer, as if the house itself were exhaling after years of holding its breath. Rosa reached out, her frail hand trembling as she touched the edge of the vault door. "He was proud of you, Alexander," she whispered. "He wanted you to remember where you came from." Alexander's voice cracked. "And I spent my whole life trying to forget." He turned suddenly, pushing through the small cluster of remaining guests. Lila called out to him, but he didn't stop. The crowd parted as he stormed past, the sound of his footsteps echoing up the staircase, fast, uneven, desperate. Rosa tried to rise, but her legs gave way again. "Let him go," she murmured. "Some truths are too heavy to carry all at once." Lila stayed beside her, torn between anger and empathy. The vault stood open behind them, its contents small yet infinite. That little photograph glowed beneath the chandelier's light, the reminder of a forgotten kindness, a debt of love turned to guilt. When Lila finally straightened, she looked toward the grand staircase. The echo of Alexander's footsteps had vanished, swallowed by silence. For a long moment, she just stood there, the maid's daughter in a billionaire's house, surrounded by the ruins of pride. Then she whispered, more to herself than anyone, "He locked up his past." But maybe that's the only thing that could have freed him. Her words hung in the air, fragile and haunting. Rosa squeezed her hand. "Go to him, Lila. Not everyone knows how to face the truth alone." Lila hesitated, glancing once more at the open vault. The watch still ticked faintly, the sound steady and alive, the heartbeat of a man long gone, guiding what was left behind. She turned toward the staircase, her pulse matching the rhythm of that ticking clock. The crowd had cleared. The air was still. Each step she took echoed softly against the marble, leading her toward a man whose world had just fallen apart. And somewhere deep in the house, behind a door no longer locked, Alexander Vane faced the one truth he could never buy: hide or silence again. The mansion was silent, stripped of music, laughter, and pride. Only the faint hum of city lights beyond the glass gave proof that life still moved outside. Alexander Vane sat in his office, his reflection fractured across the dark window. His tie hung loose, his hair unkempt, the edges of his composure unraveling with every breath. The vault's truth had not just broken his image, it had shattered the foundation of the man he thought he was. Lila stood quietly in the doorway, unsure if she was intruding or invited. The room was large, but it felt small now, as if guilt had stolen the air. Alexander didn't turn. He spoke to the glass instead. "You shouldn't be here." Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Neither should you." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "You think I deserve this humiliation?" She stepped forward, her shoes soft against the rug. I think, she said, you finally stopped pretending you don't feel anything? He looked over his shoulder then, his eyes hollow. You don't understand what it's like to be me. Maybe not, she replied. But I understand what it's like to be small in a world that looks down. The silence that followed was fragile, like glass about to crack. Alexander turned away again, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. That vault, he murmured, was never about money. It was my father's memory, his failures, his debt to people like your mother. I couldn't bear it. The idea that my family owed its success to someone who cleaned our floors. Lila didn't answer right away. She watched his reflection instead of his face, watching the way guilt distorted his outline. So you built a monument to your shame, she said quietly, and called it a safe. He closed his eyes, his jaw tightening. You're right, her voice softened. You mocked me to feel untouchable, but the truth is, you were locked inside that vault long before I ever touched it. Alexander turned toward her fully now, the mask of arrogance gone. How do you forgive something like that? She hesitated. You don't ask for forgiveness because it's easy, she said. You ask because it's heavy. He sank into his chair, exhaling as if each word pulled the strength from his lungs. The glow of the city painted faint gold across his face. I used to think weakness was something to hide. My father, he couldn't handle failure. When he died, I swore I'd never need anyone. Not family, not friends, especially not the people beneath me. Lila moved closer, her expression unreadable. Needing people isn't weakness, Alexander. It's the only thing that makes us human. He stared at her, really seeing her for the first time, her calm, her courage, her restraint. He remembered how steady her hands had been while his entire world fell apart. For the first time, he felt smaller than the maid's daughter he'd once mocked. Where's your mother? He asked softly. In the kitchen, Lila said. She's still crying. He nodded slowly, his throat tightening. I should see her. When they entered the kitchen, Rosa sat alone at the table, a cup of untouched tea cooling between her palms. Her eyes were swollen, but her posture straightened the moment she saw him. Alexander froze at the threshold. Words hovered, fragile and afraid. Then with effort he took a step closer. Mrs. Rosa, he began, his voice low. I owe you more than I can ever repay. She looked up at him, not as a billionaire, not as her employer, but as the boy she once cared for. No, Alexander, she said gently. You don't owe me. You just forgot. His composure broke. He knelt beside her chair, his head bowed like a child seeking shelter. I'm sorry, he whispered. For everything. For forgetting who kept me alive when my father couldn't. For turning gratitude into pride. Rosa placed her trembling hand on his shoulder. Pride can be loud, she said softly. But forgiveness is quiet. You don't need to beg for it. You just need to live it. Tears slipped from his eyes, silent but relentless. The man who had built walls of iron now knelt beside a woman who had built love out of nothing. Lila watched them, her chest tightening with something she didn't have a name for. Pain, maybe, or grace. It felt like both. When Rosa's breathing steadied, Lila spoke softly. You built locks, Alexander, she said. But maybe they weren't meant to keep others out. Maybe they were to keep yourself from seeing what you lost. Her words hit him deeper than any reprimand. He looked at her, really looked, and nodded slowly. You're right, he said. And maybe it's time I learned to open more than safes. The moment hung between them, warm and fragile. A long silence followed before he rose to his feet. You said once, he began carefully, that worth isn't what's locked away. Lila tilted her head. I remember. I want to help you, he continued. Not out of guilt, but respect. You have a mind that listens where others shout. Let me fund your education. Let me invest in what you already are. She hesitated, unsure if it was pride or fear holding her back. You don't have to. I know, he interrupted gently. But I want to. Her eyes softened. Then don't call it repayment, she said. Call it a beginning. He smiled faintly, the first real smile she'd seen on his face. A beginning, he repeated. The tension eased, replaced by a quiet calm that neither of them expected. Rosa looked at them, both pride shining through her tears. "Maybe that's what your father wanted all along," she murmured. "For you to remember that the strongest doors open both ways." Outside, dawn was beginning to push against the horizon. The light slipped through the windows, turning the marble floors to gold. Alexander looked around the house. The same walls that once felt like fortresses now felt almost human. As Lila and her mother turned to leave, he spoke again, his voice steady but low. "Thank you," he said. Lila paused at the doorway, the faintest smile on her lips. "Don't thank me," she said. "Thank the silence that finally let you listen." And for once, Alexander Vane didn't have an answer. Only the weight of something new pressing against his chest, something fragile, something freeing. Later, when the newspapers would call her the girl who opened the billionaire's vault, he'd know the truth they couldn't print. She hadn't just unlocked metal. She'd unlocked him. The morning light was soft, almost shy, spilling over the gates of St. Albans University. Lila paused just before stepping through, her fingers brushing the edge of the new leather bag slung across her shoulder. The air carried the scent of rain and possibility. Students hurried past, laughing, calling to friends. She didn't know any of them yet, but for the first time she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, not by the world, but by something within herself. She'd received the letter weeks ago. Full academic scholarship, it had said. No name attached, no explanation. But tucked inside was a single embossed signature at the bottom of the acceptance form. Subtle, deliberate. The kind of signature that didn't need a name to be known. Alexander Vane. She hadn't told her mother yet. Rosa still worked at the estate, though the mansion had changed. The corridors that once echoed with orders now carried the quiet rhythm of gratitude. The staff said Alexander was different, polite, patient, even kind. Some didn't believe it would last. But Lila knew what she'd seen in his eyes that night, a man unlearning himself. She crossed the threshold, the university's tall stone arch stretching above her like an open sky. Each step felt heavier and lighter all at once. She imagined the vault door again, the final click of surrender, and the silence that followed. It wasn't victory she'd heard that day. It was freedom. Inside the main courtyard, a student bumped her shoulder and muttered an apology. She smiled, brushing it off. "It's all right," she said softly, though her voice still carried the careful grace of someone raised to move quietly in rooms that weren't hers. As she walked deeper into campus, she thought of her mother back at the mansion, humming as she folded linens, sunlight warming her tired hands. She thought of Alexander, sitting somewhere high above the city, still trying to make peace with ghosts. And she thought of the vault, how something so cold and mechanical could teach them both about warmth. Miles away, under a gray November sky, Alexander stood in a quiet cemetery. The ground was damp beneath his polished shoes, his breath misting in the chill. Before him stood his father's headstone, simple, elegant, untouched by the weight of wealth. He knelt, the motion deliberate, almost reverent. In his hand, he held the old photograph, the one Lila had found in the vault. The boy he used to be smiled back from it, one arm wrapped around a younger Rosa, both framed by the same chandelier that still hung in his house. He placed it gently at the base of the stone, anchoring it with the cracked pocket watch. "You were right," he whispered, his voice almost breaking. "Trust isn't something you lock away." The wind picked up, brushing through the trees like a quiet applause. He stood there for a long moment, eyes closed, as if listening for an answer from the man who had taught him both everything and nothing. When he finally turned to leave, the weight on his shoulders was lighter. Back at the mansion, the staff noticed the small changes that marked his transformation. The open office door, the sound of laughter returning to the halls. He'd begun hosting dinners not for the powerful, but for the people who'd built the house long before he'd inherited it. Rosa sat at the table now, not as a servant, but as a guest. When she tried to protest, Alexander only smiled. "You've earned more than a seat," he said quietly. He didn't speak of Lila often, but he didn't need to. A photograph of her acceptance letter rested on his desk, folded neatly beside a newspaper clipping. The girl who opened the billionaire's vault. The media had turned it into a legend, a modern fairy tale about a maid's daughter who outsmarted the elite. But the truth was gentler. She hadn't opened the vault to prove anything. She'd done it because silence asked her to listen. Lila's days filled with lectures, late-night studying, and the sound of unfamiliar laughter. Yet every now and then she'd find herself stopping mid-step, hearing that faint click from memory, the sound of the vault unlocking, the sound of something shifting inside her life forever. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low across the campus lawn, she sat beneath a maple tree with her notebook open. A friend beside her asked, "How did you do it?" "That safe thing. Everyone's still talking about it." She smiled faintly. "I just listened," she said. "To what?" "The silence," she answered, her voice soft but sure. "It always tells you what the noise tries to hide." The friend laughed lightly, not quite understanding, and ran off to class. But Lila stayed a moment longer, watching the golden light spill through the branches, each beam breaking apart like shards of memory. She took a deep breath, letting it fill her, the freedom, the humility, the strange peace that followed both. Back in the city, Alexander entered his office at dusk. He paused by the window, watching the lights flicker on across the skyline. The vault was still there in the corner, empty now, its door permanently ajar. He didn't lock it anymore. Instead, he kept it as a reminder. He sat at his desk and opened a letter he hadn't shown anyone. It was from Lila, short, handwritten. "Thank you for the door you opened," it read. "Not the vault, the one inside yourself. I hope one day you find it fully open." He smiled, setting the letter down beside the old watch. And in that quiet, he realized something simple. She hadn't written to say goodbye. She'd written to remind him that beginnings don't need to be loud. Weeks later, when Lila returned home for a short visit, the mansion felt different, brighter, warmer. She walked through the great hall where she'd once carried trays and wiped away footprints. Now her reflection in the marble looked taller somehow, steadier. Rosa greeted her at the doorway, tears threatening her smile. "You're home," she whispered. "Just visiting," Lila said with a grin. "Some doors only stay open if you keep moving through them." As she stepped further inside, the house creaked softly, alive again. From somewhere in the study, Alexander's voice carried faintly, speaking to someone, laughing. Real laughter this time. Lila paused, listening, and for the briefest moment she could have sworn she heard the sound again. That same quiet click from long ago. It wasn't metal this time. It was something else. The unmistakable sound of an open door, the kind that doesn't close anymore. If this story opened something in you too, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more cinematic stories that hit the heart. And tell me in the comments, what did you feel when the vault finally opened?